Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Madanmohan from YourStory. And on behalf of all of us at YourStory, welcome to this panel today on From Factory to Consumer, Evolution of Industry 4.0 and Path to Global Competitiveness. We have four outstanding panelists with us: Subhasis Chaudhari, Director of IT Bombay; Jeyandran Venugopal, Chief Product and Technology Officer of Flipkart; Kedar Ulman, Chief Supply Chain Officer at Diageo; and Rampraveen Swaminathan, Managing Director and CEO of Mahindra Logistics. I have a couple of questions for each of you before we come down to a last concluding question for all of you together. My first question would be for Subhasis Chaudhari, Director of IT Bombay. Welcome aboard the panel, Subhasis.
Thank you. Thank you.
My first question for you is, how are universities and academia taking industry's 4.0 ecosystem in India to the next level? Subhasis?
So, thanks, Madan, for asking this question, because at IIT Bombay, if you look at, as a matter of fact, all the older IITs, now we are passing through different phases of development in the academia in India, particularly in technology university. What we have done in the first 30 years or so, we had something called IIT 1.0, where the teaching was more important. Then the next 30 years, which is IIT 2.0, where it was a research we brought in, and there were a lot of this emphasis, and we started doing very well in that. And now I think for about last 5 to 10 years, it's about IIT 3.0. And this is what the key period where we would like to leverage the entrepreneurial activities as well as connecting to the industry. So this has been our primary focus over the last several years. And for that, we have been working on several verticals, okay? Then of course, one is that we have this sign, which is our, the incubator. That is, once you have some idea, you come to the incubator and then you start and do the startup. But before that, you have to have the corresponding entrepreneurial, the kind of training, okay? So we have set up Desai Sethi School of Entrepreneurship, okay, which is actually training a large number of people. And very soon we'll go out to the public to have those who are working professionals to train them. The third vertical is actually the industry, those who are already settled, the well-known companies like we have Flipkart here, Diageo and others. Can we bring them home? So we have started the research park right here in the campus. And once it is operational, we can have all these people right here so that we can work collaboratively. Now, one more aspect which you need to look at it is that, when we have a research, which is our, in the key thing that IIT Bombay or any other academic institution does. So how do you connect that to the industry? So because, the research output often ends at, something like TRL level 1, 2, 3, something maximum. And the student has to leave. So how do you take it up? So we are also thinking of setting up a TRL booster where we somehow make use of the industry into the system so that bring the TRL level so that either it goes and gets absorbed in an existing company, or maybe, something like, I would say that our own people would be very interested in terms of setting up their own company. So all these activities, if you look at it, it also needs certain kind of enabler, particularly if you talk about Industry 4.0. So we have set up several, the Center of Excellences and Technology Incubation Hub at IIT Bombay, actually, which is with a funding about 175 crores. We would like to start something more on the IoT and IoE front. And this is where actually we wanted to connect each and every industry. And for that, our primary goal is to talk to the MSMEs, because in my belief that if India has to go up, create a value chain, move up and create wealth for the nation, it's not one or two big companies. It has to be a large number of MSMEs collectively going up to make the lives of others better. And that's what will have a lot of social impact that IIT can generate. So we are looking at all these aspects and would be very happy to partner with any industry, okay, any other tech mentors, whatever it is, the venture capital, whatever they can provide. We want them to be onboarded, and we are very happy that this kind of initiatives are being taken up. So for plug-in. So I'll stop at this point. We can, discuss more later.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Subhasis, for setting the stage. Let's now turn to our second speaker, Jeyandran Venugopal, Chief Product and Technology Officer at Flipkart. Welcome aboard, Jeyandran.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on the panel.
My question for you, Jeyandran, is what kinds of impacts will IoT and AI have on businesses such as yours? Jeyandran?
Sure, Madan. I think I'll talk about different aspects of where we use IoT technologies and also AI, which has a even more broader context. When it comes to IoT tech, we have one of the largest consumer supply chains today in the country. And so we have a multi-tiered supply chain with deep reserves and fulfillment centers and for forward deployment of inventory. And of course, sortation centers that are spread throughout to do efficient sortation and routing of a couple of million plus shipments every single day that get delivered to customers in the vast geographical diversity that we have in our country. So to be able to efficiently do this, we significantly have invested in elements of robotics and automation and AI in every element of our supply chain. So for example, we have actually deployed automated guided vehicles for doing sortation at scale, so that we at that scale, it's not only a question of managing to our customer promise and SLAs, it's also about errors, right? Any human-driven process at that level of scale creates inevitable errors, and which cannot be ironed out by just having SOP documents and operational rigor, right? So that is where we have introduced automated guided vehicles. Recently, we just launched one of our largest in India B2C consumer warehouses with significant levels of automation. So for example, we have automated storage and retrieval systems that take this. So when we inward items into these large deep reserve areas, they're inverted without doing bulk breaking, right? So you will need to actually store them without bulk breaking, and these are all only possible through forklifts and others, right? So it's a very it's a very delicate process, which also poses a lot of safety concerns if not done correctly, right? At our scale, we try to deploy as much automation and robotics as possible so that storage and retrieval systems are done in a safe and high throughput manner. So these are some of the examples where we have deployed automation. So we have cross belt sorters, for example, in one of our newest facilities. We have several kilometers of length of cross belt sorters running throughout the facility, with paddle shifters that are actually doing sortation and sending it to different terminals for end processing, maybe quality checks, maybe robotic packaging. And we have moved away from like robotic arms, which have very limited degrees of freedom, but have some flexibility to be able to deal with multiple form factors, multiple what we call as LBH dimensions of packages, and being able to efficiently choose the right LBH package to pack a list of items that are now being sent to it for packaging, right? So these are just but very small examples of the complex use cases across every element of our supply chain. And we operate actually 3 different supply chains. If you look at it, what we call as a non-large supply chain, is basically handles the bulk of our deliveries and shipments. We also have large, which are like consumer durables, and they have a very different constraints around how do you handle consumer durables, right? So the weight is heavy, the form factor is very different than, let's say, shipping books, for example, right? And we also have grocery, which has even more complexities around freshness of produce in the fruits and vegetable setting and other things, right? Expiration and managing to that and all that. So every element of that is now being managed through deep infusion of technology. We use, for example, RFIDs and sensor tech everywhere to be able to efficiently process our totes and be able to process bulk loads across various thresholds in our sortation centers, loading docks, and others, right? So these are some examples. When it comes to AI, I'll just give a brief example. There is not even a supply chain example. In supply chain, of course, we use optimization tech and AI in lots of ways to reroute shipments dynamically, do forward planning, react to supply shocks and on the ground variability that we see on an everyday basis, which at our scale is inevitable, right? So you will have to expect failures in the supply chain and then figure out how you can recompute a massive graph with millions of nodes and variables to be able to find the efficient re-optimized plan, right? So all of this uses AI optimization tech and on-the-field inputs coming through sensor tech and IoT tech, feeding input variables into this massively complex model that does the rerouting and planning. Everything from beat planning on our last mile hubs to basically rerouting for middle mile and so on and so forth, right? So I can talk about it all day long, but I'll leave it at that and elaborate on it further as required.
Sure. Thanks, Jeyandran, for setting that stage very well with those specific case studies. Let's turn now to Kedar Ulman, Chief Supply Chain Officer at Diageo. My question for you to Kedar is, we've talked so much about the opportunities. Let's talk about some of the challenges now. There are some security challenges in supply chains. So how can smart solutions improve customer confidence and business partner reliability? Kedar?
So, as you know, I work in Diageo. We work in the beverage alcohol sector. And security and consumer confidence is a very big deal for us, right? Because beverage alcohol sector is a high tariff sector. If a consumer buys a alcoholic beverage for, let's say, 100 rupees, 80 rupees out of that is excise duty, and 20 rupees is our cost of, the price at which we sell it to the government. So since the tariff barrier is so high, it provides a great opportunity for counterfeiters to start duplicating our products. This is very prevalent in normal consumer goods industries, but it's quite acutely prevalent in beverage alcohol industry. And hence, security, building consumer confidence, and anti-counterfeit measures are a very good source of growth for us, right? Because we believe that anywhere between 5 to 10% of the overall industry is counterfeited. If we are able to stop or at least move counterfeiters away from our brands, that straight away adds about 10% to the growth, right? And for an industry which is growing only in single digits, it provides a great opportunity. And it's not necessarily limited to our premises. It goes right at the back end of our supply chain, right? Because we need to introduce counterfeit measures in all elements of our packaging. If we are able to create a packaging which it significantly enhances our product security or authenticity of our product, and if we are able to give that confidence to the consumers basis some simple scalable technologies, then in general we should be able to raise boundaries for the counterfeiters, and counterfeiters will not go, right? They will go to someone else, but at least our brands will see that go. So this is, particularly for beverage alcohol sector, but also similarly important for consumer goods sector. If we are able to come up with smart, not very costly and scalable solutions in consumer security and anti-counterfeiting, I think that will be a huge boost to the entire consumer goods sector. And that's something that we've been actively looking for in the market and trying to use, various small alliances to see if we can come up with something which can increase the boundaries for the counterfeiters. It's a great growth enabler for us.
Thanks, Kedar. That's a very good discussion that you had over there. My last question for this first round would be to Rampraveen Swaminathan, Managing Director and CEO of Mahindra Logistics. Rampraveen, what kind of impacts will smart logistics have on business? There's lots of talk out there on the different kinds of technologies available, but my question is more on what impacts you see smart logistics having on business. Rampraveen?
Thanks for having me. And I think it's important to just understand the landscape and the imperative which we're all dealing with. Supply chains, I think today need to be reimagined more than ever before. For one, we are seeing very high levels of volatility across the world, both in terms of cross-border and domestic supply chains. A lot more bespoke supply chains, but I think both Venugopal and Kedar just talked about just the wide variety or diversity we have in terms of supply chain design. And supply chains are more global than ever before, right? So if you're doing books, you have one source. If it's furniture, it's different. If it's durables, it's different. So as companies are trying to figure out how to win, not just focus on cost to serve, but actually focus on cost to win, there's also a larger imperative on sustainability, ESG, and so on. So the variables you're dealing with today are far more complex, and the imperatives of things that should influence your design are also changing. And therefore, I think to be successful, companies, and what we are seeing, with companies who we work with, really the focus is on four things, right? To win here, you have to drive economies of scale. You have to get much better at using assets, whether it's in-facility assets like inside warehousing or moving assets across different distances. You have to focus really on getting better on multimodal adoption, driving different forms of logistics, and figuring out how to do omni-channel fulfillment a lot better. And in some ways, I think while the journey is still young, I think technology and smart supply chains are actually very critical to enabling these imperatives to match themselves, right? And I think we do very similar things, I guess, to what some of the other examples were quoted, whether it's in terms of in-warehousing automation, ASRS systems, unmanned vehicles. We're looking at pilots with drones and so on. But we're also doing a lot of work in terms of in-field or in moving assets themselves, not in-facility assets, but actually moving assets. And I think there's a big opportunity to integrate these together, to really say how can you use technology to marry moving assets and automation inside facilities to create a new level of integration and intelligence, if you may. And I think a lot of the work which we are doing or we're looking at doing at Mahindra Logistics is really around those levers, because we think that's critical to the supply chain of the future.
Thanks. Now, for the last round of questions for each of you, I want to focus a bit more on the future. So I'd like to begin with Subhasis. What are some technologies that IIT Bombay has on its radar, emerging technologies of the future, and how can they be harnessed? Subhasis?
So, there are two things, when you look at technology and, solving the problem of MSMEs and other, we realize that number one, one or two faculty is very difficult to do it because, finally you need a completeness of the problem that you're solving. Okay. So we have created several kinds of, there are two things that we have done. One is a set of this center of excellences. For example, very recently we set it up Center for Machine Intelligence and Data Science, okay, which has roughly about 70 odd faculty members who are, across all departments, okay. So they would be looking at some of the problems that, the Kedar is saying or Jeyandran has been saying, right, how to actually get into that, okay. Where here it has people like, for example, even additive manufacturing and others, how to actually use them. So you use it even, all this, the technology, then bring it that technology incubation hub that I talked about, okay. And the other thing that I would say, like, for example, it need not be like always that, even the health, like supposing, we have also created something for Center for Digital Health, because that's also, if you look at a service, then you have to bring in all the other components, analytics, others, everything to be into that system. We had people who have been working on the visual surveillances and others, that's another thing which is very, under something called entities. We have another center of excellences. Then certain kind of thing called, there are companies which is our incubators. For example, Haystack Analytics, looking at all these gene, I would say the genomics aspects of gene sequencing. Then creating digital twins. There are companies there. Similarly, if you look at anomaly detection, either in long pipelines, like let's say supposing you have your something like a petrol or the gas pipeline supply lines, how do you actually do it? All these damage assessment defects. So we have all of them. And maybe I would like to end with one very, analogy. I think because now we are going through this pandemic, it's the technology today is more or less it behaves in that COVID-19 virus. Okay. And I tell you what it is, what do I mean by that? You try to think that you have a control over others, right? Like just like over the vaccine or others. Then what happens? There's a mutation. Something happens. It goes from alpha variant to beta and zeta, gamma, whatever. And the race continues. We also try to do it. So in academic scenario, we are empowered in some sense by our support from the ministry and other DST, many other partners, industry partners, to take up the challenge to explore something new. Because of course, in case of virus, it's a random. Okay, for us, we try to make a judicious kind of a plan to see that where we should head next. And we'll be very happy to listen to the industry. And that's what the whole idea, that let's work together. If something else is to be there, we'll try to find out our faculty members internally. If needed to be hired, we'll find out if there are experts outside. And we are doing professor of practice who has a lot of such experiences in the industry, put them together. So that's our plan. And I think, our invitation to all the industry, please come, let's talk to them, and we'll work out something which helps, because we understand that this is very, very important, because technology is moving too fast. Okay. And particularly in this sector, if you talk about industry 4.0, the developments are very, very rapid. Okay. So the question is that unless we keep pace with this, we don't want to be left behind. Indian MSMEs and others, you have to be now globally competitive. Okay. And it's our responsibility from the IITs and other good universities in here to somehow to see that the plug, you talk about the plug-in, this is where the plugging that is required from our side, so that finally it's a very useful kind of mechanism, okay, where we bring in all people together and work and see what happens. So I would stop at this point. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Subhasis, for bringing out the importance of centers of excellence and ecosystem engagement. That's also the topic of my next question for Jeyandran, which is in a complex market like India, how are integrated supply chains built, and how is Flipkart leveraging technology to ensure these supply chains operate at scale and also benefit your wide SME partner base? Jeyandran?
Sure, Madan. See, the way I'll put it is the following, right? So if we compare our vision of a digital India and getting to a $1 trillion plus digital economy in the country, and compare it to other markets that have recently had exponential growth in the digitization of their economy, right? And it'll be interesting to note some of the very key differences that add more complexity and challenge to what we want to do in our country. So let's take China, for example, right? So if you look at China, so they have 100 plus cities, each with basically 1 million plus population. So many of their big urban centers are concentrated on their East Coast. Right. So while they actually have a much larger digital economy pie, and their digital commerce pie, for example, is much larger than it is than ours today. They have some advantage, like they don't have the same level of geographic diversity in terms of the concentration, in terms of the economic centers. As we do, right? Our country is still extremely diverse, right? So in terms of geographical diversity, in terms of actually population density and the spread, right? So the second one is even vernacular diversity, for example, is another big element, right? So it's not a supply chain area, but that adds a lot of complexity to our digitalization imperative. And we have been doing a lot of work on supporting vernacular languages to be able to reach people in the language of their choice and so on, right? So now coming back to supply chain, I think one of the important elements to bear in mind for our supply chain is that many of the solutions that are developed typically for the Western markets don't end up being applicable as is in our market, because if you look at still the cost of labor, the break-even timelines that you expect as a business from any automation technology that you deploy, taking out of the box any solution developed, for example, for the developed Western markets, Western Europe, US, and so on, and trying to deploy it here will not give you the right ROI for your business, right? So you will have to usually innovate around cost of development, cost of R&D, and developing solutions that work in our environment, right? So we many times may not be able to have highly skilled operators, right? So the supply chains that we develop have to be extremely fault tolerant. Our infrastructure in the country is still developing, right? So there is not a very high level of predictability on routes, for example. Flooding happens, especially during monsoons, like routes get closed, rerouting happens, and there is no central place for you to even gain that intelligence, right? So your supply chain has to be built in a way that it's highly resilient, is able to take on the field inputs and develop a lot of localization. Even if you adopt some key technologies developed for Western markets, you need to develop a lot of localization to make that technology work for your business, your level of skill of your operators, and the level of disruptions that you expect in the context in which you're operating. So for example, just to take a simple example, right? Even addresses in India, when you're trying to operate a B2C supply chain, are very complex, right? So we don't have like an extremely gridified system where you are able to just use very, very simple OCR tech in your sortation centers everywhere to find the right place to send it to, right? You need to actually, so we developed, for example, technologies based on geocoding, reverse geocoding, and based on AI, to be able to create our own polygon data based on very varied address strings that customers are likely to put in, right? So these address strings would be like, I mean, a Western address routing system will never be able to handle the kind of addresses our customers put into their address field and for their packages, right? So how do you do that, for example, right? So then beat planning, right? So there is a lot of variability on day to day on supply that you get for your beats. So you cannot have fixed planning cycles and expect that that will work, right? So every day there is disruptions, every day there is variability in your supply as well as demand. And you need to be able to recompute on the fly and be able to react to it and deliver packages as per customer expectations. And so on, right? So those are some of the examples. And recently, for one of the use cases I would talk about in terms of how do you develop a supply chain that is fault tolerant, resilient, is one of the areas where we saw that we were incurring a lot of lossage in our supply chain was our consumer durables business, right? So basically, when we try to ship large electronic equipment, and sometimes these are also sensitive equipment, right? So if you subject them to various tilt forces, shocks, and vibration as part of your various handling protocols of your supply chain, we end up having lossage in the supply chain, right? Because you will end up delivering not just a bad customer NPS because you're delivering a dented product or a product that doesn't work as expected on the doorstep. You're also incurring the cost when you have to take back and replenish the product to the customer. So we actually deployed, working with a startup through our LEAP program, which is a startup accelerator program, technology to use IoT tech to be able to actually measure at every point during the supply chain the various forces that the packages are being subject to, and then use predictive analytics in combination with its rich stream of data flowing back to understand where we are incurring the most level of damage, to be able to tweak processes, things, training. So that's where the Internet of Everything comes into place, right? So it's not only like Internet of Things, but it's Internet of Everything. How do you integrate everything to actually create a supply chain that incorporates intelligence, data, big data, predictive analytics, and going back to a feedback chain that continuously optimizes processes, training, as well as lane selection and various other factors to keep improving on continuous goals like that, right? So we have a multi-tiered network, and every aspect of that optimizing the network involves a significant level of investment in R&D and technology deployment.
Great, thanks, Jeyandran. Let's turn to Kedar now. Kedar, what are some trends you are seeing in innovation, digital innovation, and so on in your space? Kedar?
Sorry, there was a bit of a background noise. Can you just repeat that question?
Sure. Sorry about that. The question is, what are some future trends that are emerging in digital innovation in your space?
All right. So, I mean, I'll speak on the behalf of the larger consumer goods industry, right? So, the most exploding area in consumer goods industry is logistics. Logistics has seen a lot of digital innovation. And also inside the factories, right? If you were to go inside the four wall of factories, there has been a lot of digitization for health and safety, for factory automation, quality measurement systems, etc., etc., etc. Right? So these two areas are very, very active, and I think we are on a bit of in a slightly developed space there. What we would love to see as an industry is digitization of our entire planning process, because for any consumer goods industry, planning is a very important aspect of running the overall business. Unless you are sure of what demand that you have and how you're going to fulfill it, everything else is just taking orders from the planning team, right? So it can go horribly wrong if your planning team is not up to speed. We would love to see more digitization in long-term demand estimation. What are the big breakthrough changes happening in the market, which helps us manage demand on a short-term and a long-term basis. This is where we would love to see a lot more digital action. There are lots of established tools in this space, but there is a scarcity of effective tools for long-term demand predicting. I think this is where we would definitely love to see some action. Yeah. Secondly, particularly our business is highly commodity dependent, right? And we have a lot of commodity exposures, and commodities are extremely volatile. So if there is any way of using digital or smart technologies to do a more predictive analysis of where the commodities are going, it will add immense value to our business, because as leaders of the business, we are also interested upon maintaining volatility in our top line and bottom line. And if you have such a high commodity exposure, your bottom line is always at a risk of being very, very volatile, right? So if you are able to use digitization to bring some sense of steadiness to your bottom line and the cost structure, I think it will be immensely helpful, particularly in India. Globally, most of the commodities are hedgeable. In India, most of the commodities are not hedgeable, right? So that becomes a bit of a problem. So unless you have your handle on the commodities that you're exposed to, you will always be at risk, right? Counterfeiting is something that I spoke about. This is something that most of the consumer goods players would be very, very keen to look at. If there is any digital intervention in this space which helps us improve authenticity of our product, I think it will be a huge growth lever for most of the consumer players, right? And the last thing is the entire industry is now becoming more and more environmentally sensitive. So sustainability is as important as running our business, right? And hence we are looking at various mechanisms, and digital is one of them, which can help us save water, reduce our greenhouse emissions, and reduce the amount of plastics that we are sending out into the environment, and help us collect it and get it recycled at our own expense. Improved recyclability in our plastics, in our overall packaging. Right? So there is a lot of action on sustainability, and I'm sure most of the leading consumer goods players are looking at turning water positive, carbon neutral, completely recyclable, so on and so forth. Any digital innovation or any new technology coming in this space will get lapped up, and it will have a lot of currency amongst big consumer players like us. So of course, as I said, a lot of action on logistics, a lot of actions on in-factory automation and digitization. But the real need is in planning, in commodity management, anti-counterfeiting, and sustainability. We would really welcome stuff coming in this area.
Thanks, Kedar, for pointing out those very broad areas of innovation and trends. My last question in this round is for Rampraveen. Rampraveen, we're talking about competitiveness and innovation in Industry 4.0. So my question for you, Rampraveen, is how is India faring in this as compared to, say, other countries? How innovative is India? How competitive is India in Industry 4.0? Rampraveen?
Madan, so I think from a logistics perspective, so there's an incredibly huge amount of action. I think Kedar referred to it, and I think you heard from the Flipkart person as well. There's a huge amount of energy around this, and I think just a diversity of problems we have in India. Just huge number of variables, from finding the right addresses to having continuous weather-driven challenges, route accuracy. There's just a huge number of use cases to solve for, and I think there's a very large number of people who are trying to address that. So I won't call out one or two specific companies, but I think there's just a huge sort of players in the space, and I feel that developing an ecosystem is even more important. And I just think that the opportunity and the problem is too large, and at least in Mahindra Logistics, we've seen that in some of our startup incubator programs. There's a huge amount of traction, and just the kind of solutions we're seeing is really energizing as well. I would echo a couple of areas which I think Kedar already mentioned, where we're not seeing enough. I think one is really around how do we leverage technology to make the entire supply chain more sustainable. I think a lot of action right now is just around single-use plastic, or some early elements of carbon sequestration, but just how do you use technology a lot more to predict your supply chain's footprint, optimize it. And the second one is really integrating across technology. So a lot of the solutions we see, and we work with a lot of players, is really around figuring out how to do better network optimization, how do you deliver better, right? How do you operate your warehouses better? But actually looking at saying how do you manage an entire supply chain in a far more efficient way, and integrate, and finding technology platforms to integrate across, all those levers, allow you to actually build a much greater level of agility and resilience. I think that's still something where there's a lot of opportunity and work to be done.
Thanks, Rampraveen. We're almost out of time, but before we wrap up, I want to ask each of you one quick last question, which is, we've got many entrepreneurs in our audience. So what are some tips, some gyan you would like to share with our audience on how to be successful as a tech entrepreneur? Subhasis, some tips from you?
Well, I'm the last of the entrepreneurs here because I've been a faculty member. But seeing the, basically, I would say that entrepreneurship, of course, there is a certain kind of knack one develops in life, during the process. But I would say it is always good to get a good mentor in terms of some formal training in this, which probably would help improving the hit ratio when you are an entrepreneur. I think that's what I would, request all people to look into that, particularly if you're a fresh one.
Got it. Thanks. How about you, Jeyandran? Some tips for aspiring the next future Flipkarts of the world?
Sure, Madan. I think there are lots of problems to be solved, and the opportunity is endless in the country, right? So, and we are just getting started on some of these technology levers. So the one thing I would say is while it is fine to actually develop solutions based on a technology as a key lever, developing solutions that are looking for problems usually ends up being a harder route for you to find a product market fit. So while you may have a core of technology that has a lot of use case, a lot of applicability to use cases, I would definitely encourage entrepreneurs to early on seek out specific problem statements, specific use cases, and co-develop their solutions along with a vested customer who's going to give them the space to operate and experiment and refine their solution. So a lot of startups that we work with have told us that they gained immense value in trying to actually adapt their solutions and their technology to our use cases and needs. And in that process, their product itself became much more robust and better. So I would advise them to early on seek real customers, customers who are supportive, understanding of deep tech startups, and the fact that investment is needed from their time as well, from energy, and giving them the leeway. And that would be my one advice I would have for entrepreneurs.
Kedar, you're from a global brand. What do you see from where you are, and what advice would you give for the young startups in our audience?
I'll just build on to what Jeyandran has said. I totally agree with what he says. It's important for any upcoming entrepreneur, particularly in the B2B space, right, to be more customer need focused and less product focused. What we've seen in the market is that moment a particular idea gets a little bit of attraction, you will have hundreds of entrepreneurs jumping into that space. As Rampraveen had said, right, logistics is a buzzing area. Now you throw a stone and you will have 10 tech entrepreneurs in the logistics space, but they are just replicating what others are doing, right? And as they do more and more of it, the competitive edge goes down. Instead, if at the onset of their entrepreneurship journey, if they were to understand what are the white spaces in the industry, and honestly, there will be a lot of pull from us, right? Because we would love to interact with entrepreneurs who can do this, who can give us these agile solutions, which we really are not able to give, because fundamentally as a large organization, we are not agile, right? So if they spend time with entrepreneurs through various alliances, their chances of success are far higher in the B2B space, right? If someone wants to go and set the world on fire in the B2C space, I think, so I don't have much to offer to them. But in the B2B space, spend time, understand what are the white spaces, where will be the maximum pull from players like us, and we'll be more than happy to, provide them an incubating support. We would be delighted. They add a lot of important complementary skills to us. rather than being product focused and trying to sell something which other 10 people are already selling. Yeah, that would be my only advice to the entrepreneurs.
Thanks, Kedar. That's very good advice indeed. Rampraveen, you have the last word. You've been engaging with startups.
No, I just first echo what Subhasis and others, all the other panel members have said. Just good mentorship, co-creating with customers, thinking outside in terms of use case. The only thing I would add there is, you be true to yourself and don't try to be everything to everyone. One thing which we found sometimes in our incubator program is entrepreneurs or startups are trying to kind of respond to everything which people ask for. So my one advice would be, don't try to be everything to everyone. Stay true to yourself, right, and to the use case.
Thanks, Rampraveen, Jeyandran, Kedar, and Subhasis. We come to the end of a panel discussion. I think 3 key takeaways from me are the 3 S's: smart, scalable, secure. Don't just use technology for the sake of technology. Use it to understand the customer and the ecosystem. Scale your solution, especially for a giant market the size of India and the world, and make sure things are secure so customers and business partners are on board. Thank you all very much. I wish you all the best in your journeys ahead. Thank you.